So, hey guys, been a while since we did one of these, but it's another card discussion. Today we're talking about Mystical Refpanel. So, this card is pretty interesting because its effect is activate only when a spell card that targets one player is activated. The effect of that spell card is applied to the other player instead, so you don't have to necessarily pay the cost, which is actually pretty interesting. So, for example, we'll go to Desires, and Desires effect is banish 10 cards from the top of your deck face down, and that's the cost, and then draw 2 cards, and that's the effect of Pot of Desires. But if you look closer right to this part, activate only when a spell card that targets one player is activated, so it can only be activated on certain specific cards, and one player needs to be targeted specifically, which makes it kind of weird. And it's only specifically when a card is activated. So it doesn't work on continuouses, like, for example, a Runic Fountain. So, Runic Fountain, you wouldn't be able to chain this to Runic Fountain, which is, like, alright, I guess. And you also wouldn't be able to use it on Raigeki necessarily, because it destroys... It says destroy all monsters your opponent controls, so I'm not sure if this directly actually counts, but this kind of counts because it technically targets one player. I'm not exactly sure about the rulings for Raigeki, but this wouldn't really come up anyways, so it's not very important. But interesting interaction you have is with specifically Cold Feet. So if you activate Cold Feet and then chain Mystical Refpanel to it, this otherwise useless card becomes kind of like a lingering floodgate for your opponent. So it says you cannot activate, set, or use the effects of any spell trap cards this turn. So then this goes ahead and applies it to your opponent instead if you use Mystical Refpanel, which is weird, I guess. And some Runic cards you could copy their, well, take their effects, I guess. So you can go ahead and use the effect of, well, your opponent, let's say your opponent uses Runic Destruction and then you use Mystical Refpanel, then you would be able to target one spell trap your opponent controls, destroy it, then banish the top 4 cards of your opponent's deck. Since it only targets them, maybe, unless it doesn't work like Duster and Raigeki, but I'm not sure if it does or not, so not focusing on that too much. But same thing with Desires. With Extravagance, you can go ahead and activate Refpanel to Extravagance. Your opponent will do the banishing for you, and you get to do the draw to Huzzah. And same thing with Pot of Prosperity as well. But the one that's really interesting is Into the Void, actually. So, if you've noticed, this is actually all part of the effect of Into the Void. If you have 3 or more cards in your hand, draw 1 card, and if you do, during the end phase of this turn, discard your entire hand. So, you're letting your opponent draw 1 card, and then they would discard their entire hand because of Refpanel if you go chain 1 Into the Void, chain 2 Refpanel, which is pretty funny. And I guess this is just hand looping, really, but it's a bit nasty, I guess. But it's also limited in the sense that you can't actually activate this against any traps. So if your opponent activates, well, really any trap, like, you can't do anything about it. It'll just resolve. Like, I guess Woboku will say, sure, you take no battle damage this turn, your monsters cannot be destroyed by battle this turn. You can't stop a Woboku with Mystical Refpanel because it only targets, well, it only can be used in response of spell cards. and very niche ones at that, requiring specifically one player to be targeted. So that terminology is not used very often, so I'm not 100% certain how it works, but it only mentions one player on Raigeki, so I'm going to go under the assumption if only one player is mentioned, you can ref panel it. Because I have been unlucky and have gotten no copies of Mystical Refpanel, and I'm not going to craft these, honestly. It's a You Earn the Legacy. And for some reason I have a lot of copies of Aurum, I believe, right? Yes, I'm at 5 copies of Aurum. And still going. And I think I have some other copies of cards like this. Pretty yucky. But anyways. Mystical Refpanel also, since it is a trap, you would have to set Mystical Refpanel and then wait a turn before being able to activate it. But there are some options, I guess, that would allow you to activate it on the first turn. But it would be purely gimmick to do so, and in fact, already playing it in your deck, it's kind of gimmicky as well. So I believe I have gotten the card recently. I do not remember the name exactly though. I believe it was like Mikura or something like that. Ah, there we go. Yeah, Makura. A little bit off. I guess you could use Makura, the Destructor's effect, if you sent Makura from the monster zone to the graveyard specifically. You can activate a trap card from your hand this turn, so in this case you could use Refpanel. Interestingly enough about Makura though, is it has to be sent from the monster zone to the graveyard, and not just the field to the graveyard, so it doesn't work with Union Carrier, and I'm just wondering why all of those newer cards have that. It's kind of weird that they aren't phrased this way, like Makura, honestly. But that just proves that Makura is balanced, I guess. And then the other way I know of is Temple of Kings. If you have Temple of the Kings here, you can activate a trap card the turn it was set, so you could also activate Mystical Refpanel that way. So I guess it would be goofy, but technically on the first turn using Makura or Temple of the Kings, you could activate Into the Void. And then have your opponent just get completely hand looped. If they don't have an Ash Blossom, I guess, kind of, but whatever. And I guess, you could also, I believe this works as well, right? This was the name of the card, right? Yeah, Trap Trick. So you can use Trap Trick as well. So you have like effectively 6 copies of Refpanel, I suppose. And then just force your opponent to get hand looped for Into the Void. A bit gimmicky, but that's something you can do. Aside from that, I think these two interactions are probably the most interesting, Cold Feet and Into the Void, but I do know that Sword Soul players really, a lot of them play Pot of Desire, so it could be a good tech if, I don't know, if this affects a meta deck really well. Like, maybe it'll affect this. Let's see. I don't know if it counts for cards like Branded Fusion, but if you could ref panel Branded Fusion, that would be just hilarious. But I'm pretty sure you can't activate it on Branded Fusion. I would need to check to make sure if you could or could not, but I do know for a fact that you can use Into the Void and Cold Feet the way I said you could. And I guess the thing about Cold Feet and Mystical Refpanel, though, is at least this accomplishes 2 things specifically. The first is this is actually incredibly hard to negate if your opponent activates Cold Feet and then chain Mystical Refpanel. The only response you have, like, to deal with this specifically is to activate Red Reboot, and there's no other possible response for you to deal with this, pretty much. I guess there's like Cyframe Delta, so whatever, but your options are very limited against this. And after this resolves for the whole turn, your opponent will, or whatever, will be completely locked out of their spells, traps, and they cannot set them or activate them. So if we had a side deck, I'd consider playing a deck that could run this together. That'd be fun. Into the Void is not as good because you'd have to commit more for it, like it enters like kind of FTK territory where you need to set up stuff with either Makura or Temple of the Kings. And aside from that, yoinking someone's like Extrav or Desires is pretty cool though. You can also, I guess, take their duality as well, which is pretty nice. But yeah, that's basically Mystical Refpanel. Let me know if I got something wrong here, but this card has like really gimmicky text that's not really seen on like, in fact, I don't know if there's any other card that does anything even remotely similar to this one, so yeah. I'll see you guys later.